Allowance, where real-world knowledge is discussed. Your future is what matters, and the broke college student is no longer the status quo. Young or old, don't put your future on hold. We welcome you to the show. I'm your host, Luke Grossnicklaus, joined by co-host Austin Partridge. Austin, how's it going today?
It's going good today. Sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties. I have no idea what's going on there, but no, today's a good day. Thanksgiving break is coming up. Looking forward to heading home and spending some time with some family and just kind of getting able to relax a little bit. So, how's your day going, Luke?
Oh, pretty good. Day's going well. Actually, just finished up my last day of my practicum for my education degree at Kearney High School, and officially heard yesterday that I'm student teaching at Kearney High School this upcoming semester. So, good news there, and looking forward to that. And semester's kind of winding down, which is kind of weird. It usually starts to Thanksgiving break's kind of usually the prime point in the semester, but for me it's a little bit different. So happy to be doing that and happy to be on the show today as well. Today we're going to be talking in our first segment a little bit about marriage and the importance of marriage and the importance of a strong relationship. And then further on in the show we're going to talk about the cost of weddings to go along with getting married, as well as how you can get married and maybe not break your budget as much as well. So looking forward to a good show today. Should be some good discussion. But for this first segment, the topic of why get married and why is a strong marriage so important. And the thing that myself and Austin want to talk about is not political reasons, not religious reasons. We just want to talk about it on an economic basis. And so that's what I'm looking forward to in the discussion.
So am I, and Luke and I are obviously not even close to being experts on this subject by any means, but I am excited about our topic today for several different reasons. And we've mentioned before on our show that the number one cause of divorce is money fights and money problems, and I don't think we can talk about marriage before we have the discussion on money, right? It's not actually the money that causes these problems in marriage. It's the disagreement over money. I was listening to Dave Ramsey episode today, and he kind of touched on that point. And so he also just suggests that you should put all of your debt out on the table, right, with all of your cards facing up. And so he mentions that it's time to come completely clean and get in an agreement about what is going on in your relationship. So hopefully today we're able to just kind of illustrate the importance of marriage and provide some good tips on how to go about budgeting and paying cash for a wedding.
Right, and really looking forward to it. Like you said, the article we have first kind of discuss a little bit, and something that really stood out to myself and Austin as we were preparing for the show is an article from thefederalist.com, and the article is titled, "The Research Proves the Number One Social Injustice Imperative is Marriage." And so we're going to walk through this article a little bit with you and just give you our take of what we think the article says and kind of what we think about what it says as well. And again, we just want to note that we're not getting political with this. We're not getting religious or anything with that. We just want to talk about it from an economic basis and an economic benefit of having a strong marriage and what that can do for you as well. So we're going to dive right in, and the first thing we're going to touch on is kind of the what employment and what poverty has kind of looked like in the last 70, maybe 50 years or so, and how that has changed over time as well. So it says, an important contributor to pushing men and women and children toward the American dream is little known and widely ignored. And it says this contributor is marriage. So it says 70 years ago, employment was the main sign of social mobility and protection from poverty. Those who had a full-time job, those who had full-time work of any kind were seldom poor. It then says 50 years ago, education separated the haves and the have-nots. But now, for the last 20 years or more, though, marital status has increasingly become the central factor in whether our neighbors and their children rise above, remain, or descend into poverty. Austin, what are kind of your thoughts about this first part of the article?
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint exactly why this is occurring in the United States today, I think. I think society can be partly to blame, but I think the bigger point here is to learn from the fact that marriage is important from an economic standpoint, and it has become really a deciding factor between those who live in poverty and those who are not in poverty. And so it's really just important to look at here.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing how much the times have shifted, and I can definitely see that a lot. I think older generations, education was really important. Not everyone had the ability to go get a college degree. not everyone even went on to post-secondary education. So those that did in older generations really had that advantage over people that didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And even 70 years ago, just finding employment was one of the biggest things for staying out of poverty and such. But we've seen that those are still important, but they've kind of diminished in comparison to your marital status and kind of what the financials look like in that realm, because we see that the focus of this article kind of shifts to strong marriages rather than employment and education.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say when you think about it, you think of the people that divorces can be tough, separations can be tough, single-parent households can also be tough. And then I think a big thing we're seeing in our society today is the cohabiting of couples living together and maybe not being married. And we'll share some statistics as we keep moving on in this article with you, but we just kind of wanted to give you a start of what it's going to talk about and kind of what it touches on.
Yeah, and so the article goes on to say, according to Professor Bill Galveston, who was President Clinton's domestic policy advisor and is now a senior fellow at Brookings, he explained that early in the 1990s that an American need only do 3 things to avoid living in poverty. And those 3 things are graduate from high school, marry before having a child, and have that child after the age of 20. Only 8% of people who do so, he reported, will be poor, while 79% who fail to do all of these 3 will be poor. That's some crazy statistics there, and this referred to as the success sequence, the graduate from high school, marry before having a child, and have a child after the age of 20. Because it's really, I think it's that simple, right? All you need to do is complete those 3 things, relatively easy things, in order, and that will greatly enhance your opportunity for success within your marriage and in your life in general.
Yeah, and I'm right on the same board with you of how alarming those statistics are. And I mean, myself and yourself, we've completed 2 of those. I mean, 2 of those steps of not having a child yet before we're married and graduating from high school, I guess. And it does seem kind of easy in a sense. I know it might be more difficult for others as well. But just the statistics of if you do those 3 things, and research has shown this, again, graduate from high school, get married, have children after you're married, and then have a child after the age of 20, 92% of the time you aren't going to be in poverty. And that's an alarming statistic compared to the other side of it. If you don't do one of those things, you have a 79% chance of falling into poverty. So just some things to kind of think about, and kind of I think that maybe our crowd kind of falls into the same realm of us of we have a lot of these things accomplished, especially with those on a college campus. They're getting even more education and all these things, but really just stuck out to me, all those statistics.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing we're diving into in the article, it says the increase of baby carriages coming before marriage is terribly alarming among the working poor. And so the statistics on this say working class women are nearly 3 times more likely to have children out of wedlock than upper class women. And then poor women are about 5 times more likely to do this. It says these 2 groups are far less likely to be married overall and twice as likely to be cohabiting, suffering further from inherent instability of living together without marriage. So when we think of this, obviously there are struggles and there's times where things happen and there's children born out of wedlock. But just another statistic that if that does happen, you are more likely to live in poverty, and it's kind of tough times that could come from that. I'm not saying that you're a bad person by any means if that happens. Again, we're not here to judge anything that's happening maybe in our society, and we're not trying to say that anyone's bad for doing that, but just kind of giving you statistics of how alarming it is if that were to happen.
Yeah, that is pretty alarming, and I think something important to examine when we look at this is for people who live together without being married, strictly from a financial perspective, is that they're together, but their finances are not. It's almost like having a roommate, and Luke can attest to this. Roommates don't necessarily come together and share information about their budgets and everything like that. They're not always on the same page 100% of the time, and so I think it can be challenging to live with someone who you're not 100% committed to and really on the same page with when it comes to your finances. And I think, just from my perspective, I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing this happen.
Yeah, and I would say a big reason we're hitting on this article is I heard a stat from the Dave Ramsey show a few days ago that said there are actually more people cohabiting together, living together without being married, so maybe just couples living together without being married, than there are actually married couples living together in our society today. So cohabiting is actually taken over for rather than being married in our generation, and so that's why we wanted to bring this up and kind of the benefits of actually being married, having that wedding, and what it can do for your overall finances.
Yeah, and so a recent report on this topic, focusing on millennials, reports that 97% of those who follow the success sequence, which is earn at least a high school diploma, work, and marry before having children, will not be poor as they enter into their 30s. But sadly, fewer and fewer millennials are keeping these things in the correct order compared to their boomer and Xer forebears. This goes beyond a moral or romantic idealism as well. They're simply pragmatic economic decisions powerfully affecting class mobility, where people live on a social scale and the opportunities that they will be able to provide for their children. This is because the extraordinary economic power of marriage. And I think that's really important to look at, the economic power of marriage, because we are looking at this from a financial perspective, and I think this notes that there's a high economic correlation between winning with your money and the success sequence as we mentioned here. So if you do follow these three relatively simple steps, research does suggest that there is a correlation there with success with your money and with your marriage.
Right, and I think this is this statistic right here really sums up the whole article, especially for the millennial population, and we've hit on the millennial population quite a bit as well, but 97% of the time when you do those three things that we just talked about, you will not be poor entering your 30s, as research has shown. And these are just statistics, these are facts that we're just giving to you. These aren't our opinions, these aren't anything but just straight facts that we're throwing out there. And again, I mean, the three things sound pretty reasonable to me, but again, that's just an opinion on my part. But I like how in the second part it talks how it's more than a moral choice and a romantic idealism. It's pragmatic, it's economic, and it's powerful. And just the extraordinary circumstances it can bring to your economic power in your marriage is very inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that marriage can bring is it can boost almost every measure of human well-being. So you can pick any measure that you want. It could be overall physical and mental health, your income, your savings, your employment, your educational success, your general life contentment and happiness, your sexual satisfaction, and then even recovery from serious disease, and then living a healthy diet and exercise. All these things have been proven to be boosted by a good, sound marriage. So those are all things to kind of look forward to, that maybe those of in single parenthood or those that are cohabiting may not have the same human well-being, and married people rate consistently better in each of those categories than those others.
Yeah, this was really eye-opening for me. Obviously, we've mentioned before the high divorce rate in the United States today, and it's concerning when you start to think about it. But this article really argues against that. I think you can once you have a clear understanding about your finances with your partner, then once you do that and are on the same page, these other things start to fall in place because you're not so worried about your money. And so, things like employment, educational success, just your general life happiness, those things all start to increase through your marriage.
Yeah, and we talked a lot last week about when you're talking about money in a relationship, of it tends to be a little bit more on the same page, whether as to rather when you're cohabiting, of you could both be on a different page and you're really not bounded yet by anything. So you could have those separate bank accounts, you could have those separate spending habits, and it really doesn't matter because you're not really bounded by anything. But when you are married, two become one, and that makes for usually a better financial situation as well.
Yeah, and so the article goes on to say only 4% of homes with married mother and father are on food stamps at any given time, but 21% of cohabiting and 28% of single mother homes require such public assistance. Likewise, 78% of married people own their own home, which is usually a central goal in the American dream, while only 41% of cohabiting adults and 44% of singles do. So data indicates that marital status really boosts home ownership more than home ownership increases marital opportunities. And I think these statistics are just crazy to me. Obviously, 4% of married families being on food stamps is a lot, but almost 5 times that many people that cohabitate or live as single parents are on food stamps. That is crazy. And I think that it just illustrates the importance of marriage and the emphasis that we do need to put on it once that time comes in our lives.
Mm-hmm. And I am all for helping those in need, and I'm a big believer in charity, and I'm a big believer in giving. And that's an alarming statistic to me, and I feel for some of those single mothers, and I feel for some of those single parents, but it's the cohabiting one that really kind of strikes me as, man, 21%,
Yeah.
that's tough to swallow, because that's more of a choice. Sometimes there's things that can happen in marriage that are just kind of out of your control, and sometimes it falls into that single motherhood, and I feel for those. But the people that cohabitate and fall into this 21% of them seeking public assistance, that's one that I do tend to struggle with, because that's more of a choice than rather a bad situation. So that is another kind of thing I could speak on, but I do like that statistic of only 4% of married mother and father homes are on government assistance or food stamps or whatever that may be. Mm-hmm. And then there's even more statistics kind of breaking it down below that say the percentage of those unable to meet basic monthly bills. And so it says those that are unable to meet your monthly bill payments, if you're married, there's about 15% that aren't able to. If you're cohabiting, there's about 30% that aren't able to. So it doubles the amount when you cohabitate of the inability to meet your basic monthly bills. And then single with another adult in the picture is 33% are unable to. And then single with no other adult in the picture is 36%. So it just continues to rise as you separate it from that marriage.
Yeah, it's really, once you look at the graph, I wish our viewers could see this, but it is, a dead correlation with money and marriage versus cohabiting or, living a single parent lifestyle. But I think this is simply not just because well-to-do people are more likely to marry, but that marriage itself is a wealth-generating tool. I think this is what that research is really pointing out.
Yeah, so I would say kind of in conclusion to this article is that we wanted to just run through that on an economic scale, because we're going to be talking about weddings coming up here in our next segment. So if you got anything, just kind of get the economics out of it. I know you can kind of read into politics or religion with all that stuff, but we just wanted to give you an economic basis of what all those things say and kind of the percentages and the facts of what may happen if you decide to cohabitate, or if something goes wrong in your marriage, kind of the defining moments that can happen when something goes wrong and how that can affect your financial needs and your financial well-being. So we're going to go to break here, and then going off of the topic of marriage, when we come back, Austin and I will be discussing the cost that go into having a wedding. And the average wedding cost in Nebraska is just over $25,000. So find out how we crunch these numbers when we come back. Also, we're live on Facebook. Feel free to send in any questions that you have. We'll be answering those again in the final segment. It's 22 minutes past the hour. This is the Weekly Allowance. That thing is not working.
Yeah, I think this thing's messing up.
Can you just turn on the radio or something?
Yeah. You just want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Some technical difficulties here on the show. Oh my goodness. Oh, I think Ben's calling in.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Should I just...
Yeah, see what goes on with that.
Green... Should I just press this?
Yeah, you may have to pick up the phone.
Pick it up?
Yeah. And then push the green button, maybe.
Hello? Hey, how's it going? Alright, so we're going to try to get you figured out here. I currently have you on the phone here.
So for anyone on Facebook Live, we're getting a
you're
caller
on air
here.
yet.
We're getting a caller here. It's actually going to be my brother Ben on the air, who got married last May. So he's going to talk through some wedding costs with us. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that first segment.
Alright, hello?
Definitely doesn't necessarily correlate with what we're going to talk about later, but we just wanted to approach marriage and kind of the different things that go on with an economic scale according to those things. So just wanted to get you guys involved in that discussion. And then I think you guys will like these last two segments much better if maybe those statistics weren't everything you were hoping for. We want to apologize for the technical difficulties. We haven't really ran into these this year, but this is our 9th episode we're doing with the weekly allowance, and this is kind of our first time we've ran into anything, so kind of blessed about that. But
I thought this is how our first show was going to go, but
yeah.
Man, 9th one.
Yeah, and going with these phone calls could have a few more technical difficulties, so just stay with us and stick around. We enjoy you guys watching and listening as well. Feel free to send in any of your questions that you have, and we'll try and get those answered in the last segment. Again, we had a lot of fun with that last week, so looking forward to all those that are tuning in.
So I think if I put it down, it's going to hang up, right?
Probably.
I think...
What's the button below this? Answer hold on air.
Oh, maybe. Hello? I tried it because it was here.
Like, do you think we have to be on air?
I think I would have to...
Should we just turn this off and try and experiment for a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello? 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 Ben, you there? Oh, now he's here. Here, you talk to me.
Is he through?
He's just through the phone. Oh, here, you try.
Say hello again. Yeah, I don't think we're getting you through here yet.
He's just through the phone, though.
Just through the phone. We're trying to figure it out. Let's see.
I think he should probably put the phone, like, hang it back up and then have him try to call again. And then just, so we can get him, like, because I don't think we are, like, on the phone.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So I'd just say, have him call back, like, right
Okay.
away.
Yeah, hang up and then try and call back, and we're going to try something different. Yep, same number. Bye.
So now when he calls, I think I'm just going to press this screen. Just to point out to our viewers right now, we've had absolutely zero training on how to use any of this equipment. And so we just kind of got thrown into it here. But we're working through it, so thanks for being patient, guys.
Alright, so do your magic, whatever you think is going to work.
Hello? Hello? Ben, you there? Hello?
Doesn't have anything to do with our mics.
Hello? I don't know. Phone line 1.
Yeah, we'll just go.
Red on air to board, blue on air to board.
We'll just go with the speakerphone.
Alright.
That'll be better for Facebook Live anyway.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hello?
Go green, maybe.
Ben? We're just going to have you call Luke's phone and we're going to put you on speaker. If that's alright. Alright. It's just static on the radio right now.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so we should.
Alright, thank you. Bye.
As close as possible.
We'll have to turn that mic on.
He said radio's good now.
What mic is that?
Mic 4.
4, yeah, I'd turn it on. Don't call him.
Some might be something. I'm gonna call Ben. It's such a long time. Come on. Hey.
Yeah.
Perfect. We're just gonna put a speaker right up next to my phone here, and then hopefully that works.
Okay.
Cool.
All right, let's jump back into it.
Most technical difficulties we've ever had on the show. Woo. We're rolling with it.
Ready?
And we're back here on the weekly allowance here on 91.1 KLPR. This is the weekly allowance. We're also streaming live on Facebook if you guys want to join us there. Again, we got to apologize for all these technical difficulties that we've been having on the show, and hopefully it all works out all right. So we're just going to keep trucking along with the show, and for this segment, we're going to be talking about the average cost of having a wedding and who pays for that wedding, and all the things that go along with that. So we're going to dive right into it. I'd like to welcome my older brother, Ben, who is living in Phoenix, Arizona, and welcome him to the show. Ben, how's it going today?
You know, it's going well. Thanks for having me. Glad to be on the show. Excited to talk about marriage and money.
Right, and we're happy to have you, and so we're just going to get this thing rolling. So we want to remind you, before we get the conversation rolling, that these are just averages. These are the averages of the wedding costs around the country, and it can depend on your geographic location of what the cost may be. And we also want to remind you that these averages do include the cost of wedding rings. So that may spike the numbers up a little bit. So to start off, theknot.com did a study in 2016 of nearly 13,000 couples and found that the average wedding cost is $35,329. So right above $35,000 is the average cost of a wedding in the United States in 2016. Before you say that $35,000 sounds like far too much, or maybe even too little, if you think that's not that much, keep in mind that this is just an average, like I said. And depending on your zip code, that number may be higher or lower. So for example, in Manhattan or in New York City, the average cost is actually right above $78,000. But in places like South Dakota and Arkansas, it's more towards $19,000. You heard me say that before we left for the break. The average wedding cost in Nebraska was $25,000. So those are just some statistics to work with as we start the show.
Yeah, and I would just point out before we dive into anything here, I think your guests are going to be happy with or without some over the top, expensive, elaborate wedding. Your wedding day is special, and it's special for you and the person you're committing your life to, and that's what really makes the day truly special. Is everyone coming together and to celebrate that step in your life. And so, we're going to be talking about some of the costs that go into weddings and who pays for what here. But don't feel the need that you have to dazzle your guests by any means. They're there to support you. And so, I guess just a disclaimer before we jump into any of these costs here.
Yeah, so I wanted to pass it over to Ben quickly and kind of ask him what these averages looked like to him. And maybe if you saw numbers this high when you got married, Ben got married last May, I guess I should put that as a disclaimer, but I want to know if you saw numbers this high or what the averages kind of looked like for you.
I guess the number really, I think especially for Nebraska, is probably fitting. I think the huge difference probably would be between Omaha and Lincoln, and then the rural areas. I got married out in Oglala, Nebraska, and being in a rural area, I think the number was probably not that high. you're probably going to look at more expensive weddings, being in the city, a lot of different areas, things like that. But you can definitely do it for cheaper than $25,000, in my opinion, especially in rural Nebraska.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like I said, geographic location has so much to do with it. So if you're having a wedding in Nebraska and you're having a wedding in Ogallala compared to Omaha, kind of like Ben was saying, even the cost can be different in just your own state. So we unfortunately don't have the average breakdown of numbers from city to city around Nebraska, but those are just kind of the things to think about. We also want to put some averages out there. The average number of wedding guests in 2016 was only 141. Seemed a little bit low to me, but that made the average cost per guest $245, which is pretty steep. But you got to remember, if you're taking that $25,000 and you're dividing it by a lower number, then obviously the cost per guest is going to be a little bit more. So kind of alarming statistics there. I know there's some weddings where they'll invite 200 guests or maybe 100 guests or whatever it may be, but then there's some weddings where you may see 500 guests there. So I guess that's just kind of what I've seen in my wedding experience. But like you said, I haven't experienced the cost, and that's why we kind of brought Ben on the show to touch on that as well.
Yeah, and you know what stuck out to me was that says that it's up from 194 in 2009. And so the article also points out that the average cost of the wedding and the knot has tracked weddings since 2006. And so 10 years later, that amount has hit an all-time high, which revealed national average about $32,000. Cost of wedding has increased by $2,688. Luke, and I guess I would direct this question to Ben too. Why do you think the cost of weddings are increasing and reaching these all-time highs in society? I think it might be partly to do from kind of the pressure that people receive from society, but I guess what are your thoughts on that?
I'll let Ben answer that question first.
Yeah, I think, kind of what you said is society. A lot of people fall into that trap of, I got to do bigger and better, and, the cost of everything seems to be on the rise right now anyway, and then if you want to go and do bigger and better, it's going to spike even more than that. I guess that's kind of what I've seen, or kind of my opinion on that.
Yeah, and I would say you see a lot of people that want to do something different. So you might have someone, this couple didn't bring in a live band, or I even heard of things where people bring painters in to paint the first dance. They'll fly in someone to paint the first dance live, and just something that you'll never hear of, and it's like, well, we were the first ones to do that, and we really broke ground with this. So wow. People are willing to pay the price to be the first ones to do everything, and kind of like Ben said, to go over the top. And I don't think of weddings as that state of there's no correlation of the size or the cost of the wedding to how successful the marriage is, and that's one thing we have to remember. So I don't see anything like that, but you do see some people get that in their head that having the more extravagant wedding does better things, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to go into some of the different things that go into a wedding. So you have your catering costs, you have your dresses, your tuxes, your cake, the music, the flowers, photography. I could go on for days about all the different things that can go into the cost of a wedding. And I just want to break down some of the national averages just because I think these numbers are really interesting. So these are all the national averages for the things that go into a wedding for the year of 2016. So I'm just going to go through all these. The venue, national average to rent out a venue for it was $16,000. Photographer, to get a photographer for a night, right around $2,700. To get a wedding or event planner is about $2,000. To get a live band for your reception is about $4,000. To get a DJ, it's right around $1,200. The expense of flowers and other decor is right around $2,500. If you want to get a videographer, it's about $1,900. A wedding dress, average wedding dress, costs about $1,500. The groom's attire costs about $280. That's kind of funny. The difference between the wedding dress and then the groom's attire. By about $1,300, there's the difference. Wedding cakes can cost right around $500. The ceremony site can cost around $2,000. I think that kind of has to do with maybe a church, but I'm not sure we're there. Let's see. Invitations can cost about $400. Let's see. Rehearsal dinner can cost right around $1,500. Engagement ring can cost around $6,000. And then catering is about $71 per person averagely. And then the last thing is like wedding day makeup, about $100. So those are all the statistics. A lot of stuff goes into that, but I just wanted to share those with you.
That's pretty eye-opening to me, seeing all the expenses that go into these weddings, and I know that's probably something that's overlooked a lot of the times because, you know, and Ben can help me out with this, but I'm assuming you're more focused on, you know, creating a special day for not only you but your guests and everything like that, and, you know, probably putting these expenses, you know, as a second look. And I don't know, Ben, maybe you can talk about kind of how you planned your wedding and all the expenses that went in there, and I guess, were they a priority to you, or I guess I'll just kind of let you take the wheel on that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Jess and I, my wife and I, we were very fortunate as she had graduated college a year prior, and I had just graduated college a few weeks before our wedding. So as new grads, we were very fortunate to have help from our families, which is awesome. And I know not everyone's got that opportunity. But even then, you know, I don't know that we necessarily had a budget per se that we were saying, here's what we're going to spend on this, this, and this. But we more just had kind of a general sense of overall what did we feel was appropriate to spend in each area and overall. So, you know, like you said, some of these things can be expensive, and then some of them, are they necessary, and are they necessary to spend that amount of money? You know, like a wedding planner, probably great to have, can make things go smooth, but, you know, for my wedding, I guess, we didn't feel that was a great need, so that, you know, that cuts out, you know, $2,000.
Right.
You can look at this list of what you just said, and you can cut out a lot if you're willing to search around and look around and try to find the best prices and the best venues and things like that fit your eye, fit kind of what you want, but not break the budget. And I think you've said it a few times, Austin, is, you know, it's your wedding, it's your special day, it happens hopefully once in your lifetime, and, you know, you're not throwing a party for your guests, you're celebrating your wedding. And I think that's important to know. You don't want to go and break the bank so that your guests say that your wedding's the best. You definitely want them to have a good time. You want them to show up and enjoy the night. That makes your wedding that much better. But that doesn't mean you have to go take out loans and spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars just to make them happy. They should be happy if you're happy, and if the night is beautiful, you know, your guests are going to have a great time probably no matter what.
Yeah, very well said, Ben. And I would completely agree with you of what is necessary for the wedding is kind of the big topic. I think some of those things can make a wedding over the top and really great, and if you can afford that, by all means, go for it. But yeah, you look at things like wedding planners, a live band, what are some other ones? A videographer, having someone video the whole wedding. I know for my parents' wedding, I think they just set up a big old camera up somewhere in the church, and they just had one of their buddies tape it. So it's crazy how much that has changed. And even like a DJ too. I mean, I didn't know. Heck, I might need to get into the DJ business when I'm a teacher, because if you can make $1,000 a night doing that, holy smokes, can't beat that. But yeah, a lot of things go into it, and even the transportation. Maybe if you're renting a stretch Hummer limousine compared to maybe just a typical bus to get you to the reception with your wedding party. I mean, those can all go into play too. So definitely what's necessary and what you can cut out on.
Yeah, I know my sister does photography on the side, and when she shoots a wedding, it can get up there in the pay, and then, oh man, that's crazy. So yeah, now that we've kind of talked about the costs associated with weddings and everything that goes into it, as Luke pointed out, I kind of want to take a moment and just discuss who kind of traditionally pays for what in the wedding budget. And I understand this can be tricky, a tricky subject to tackle, and it's obviously going to vary case to case. But I've done some extensive research on this, and it's actually pretty interesting. So according to an article on The Knot, again, it details what is most commonly paid for by who. And I'll have to say, I learned a lot about marriages throughout this process. So hopefully this is just kind of a good guideline to follow once you do start thinking about this. And Ben, feel free to jump into if you have some input on this. But I'm just going to go jump right into it. Okay, the ceremony. The bride and family will usually pay for the church and the organist and so on, and the groom and family will pay for the marriage license and the officiant fee. As far as wedding attire, the bride will usually pay for the bride's dress. That's pretty straightforward there. The groom will pay for the groom's outfit, and all attendants will pay for their own clothing, including shoes and tuxes and anything like that. And actually that one kind of surprised me a little bit. I guess I just didn't think about that too much. Flowers and decorations. The bride and family you will usually pay for the floral arrangements, the ceremony and reception, for the bouquets and whatnot. The groom will usually pay for the bride's bouquet and the boutonnieres for the men, and corsages for the mothers and grandmothers. The honeymoon. This one's an interesting one. The groom usually pays for the complete honeymoon. And, that's something that really was really interesting to me. I was actually reading some stories on how different couples paid for their honeymoons, and actually really, a lot of these stood out to me. So I just wanted to highlight a few here. So one couple actually had hotel reward points saved up, and so they were able to stay a week in Hawaii, all-inclusive for free. That was interesting to me. Another couple had set up a honeymoon jar at their wedding reception, so people could kind of donate and pitch in to help them go on their honeymoon. And another couple, a little unconventional, they actually waited about a year after their marriage so that they could pay cash for their honeymoon, and I thought that was interesting to me as well. Moving on to photography, the bride usually pays for all the wedding photos and the video if they have one. The pre-wedding parties, the bride, the family plans usually host the engagement party, and if there's more than one, then the bride's family will usually host the first one. The groom's family plans and host the rehearsal dinner. And then obviously the maid of honor hosts the bridal shower, and the best man and the groomsmen host the bachelor party. Some fun there. As far as the reception, the bride and family usually pay for all the professional services like food and decorations, and the groom usually pays for the DJ, the band, and any liquor or open bars that they want to have. And then finally, getting to the rings, this one's pretty obvious. The bride will pay for the groom, and the groom will pay for the bride's rings. So I thought it was just interesting to see who kind of traditionally pays for what, and that's something that I hadn't even thought about. So I think it's important just to kind of highlight those and just to get people thinking about it a little bit.
Right, yeah, and I wasn't very much a part of any of our discussion when Ben's wedding was happening. I tried to stay out of it because sometimes it can be a little stressful, and I kind of just snuck under the radar. So I would ask Ben kind of what those conversations looked like between maybe our parents and Jess's parents, or between him and Jess when it came to the cost of the wedding.
Yeah, you have to have a lot of open communication, especially between the two families. Obviously the bride and the groom are at a point where they've communicated well enough and hopefully have discussed money and stuff before the wedding, but that's not always the case with the two families. So, especially if they're helping out, it's kind of a whole group effort, and really it's just about talking about it, making sure everyone's on the same page. And for us, for our wedding, we fit a lot of those traditional guidelines. The bride's side doing a lot of the wedding day stuff, and then the groom's side doing a lot of the rehearsal dinner and the rehearsal day stuff. So we were pretty traditional on most of that, and like photographer might have been split a little bit more, but things like that, it's just more of communication between the families or between the couple and how everything like that's going to work out. But like you said, what was it? you said something about the rings. I've heard things out there, 2 to 3 months salary for a ring. I know Dave Ramsey says 1 month. Kind of whatever you feel comfortable with, and I like how Dave Ramsey says, there's no research out there that says the bigger the ring, the more successful the marriage, or the better the marriage because you have a bigger ring or a better wedding day, or a more expensive wedding day. It's such a kind of a difficult concept to discuss because it's such a sentimental day, and you're putting a price tag on it for the wedding and everything. Which, how do you put a price tag on something that's such a sentimental day and it's lifelong, and it's kind of hard, but you don't want to break the bank and take out loans and start your marriage off that way, but you do want to have a day that you remember, and just some food for thought there.
Right, and I like what you said about communication between both parties of the groom's parents and the bride's parents, because there can sometimes be communication that, hey, maybe the groom's parents have more money than the bride's parents, or maybe it's vice versa, and someone expects someone to pay for something and it's never communicated. That can obviously go down kind of a negative road there. But I think that communication is so important. I was actually talking to someone at high school I'm doing my practicum at today, and she was telling me about kind of with her wedding that her groom's side of the family kind of wants more of a extravagant, maybe more higher class wedding, but her family doesn't really have the money to kind of afford that. She doesn't really want to pay that much for it. So if there's one side of the family that wants that really extravagant wedding, they might be picking up the bill for more of those extravagant things, which I thought was a good thing to hit on, and kind of good advice from her today.
Yeah, I also liked how you mentioned that, hopefully you've talked about money before this point in your life. I think that's really important, and obviously it was important for you to touch on too. So I think that's something that we need to look at when we do talk about weddings, is talking about premarital counseling and talking about finances before that point in your life. And I also like how you mentioned that, it's hard to put a price tag on this special day, but it is a necessary evil that we do pay for these things, and hopefully are able to pay cash for these things.
Yeah, I think this really goes well with our discussion of last week on just talking about money and relationships. And it's almost kind of a 2-part series that we're doing here, and this is kind of the second part of the whole relationship deal. But we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll come back in a few minutes. And once we come back, we're just going to keep talking a little bit about weddings and how you can cut the expenses for your wedding in the future. And we'll also be answering your questions on Facebook Live if anyone's submitting any of those. It's 51 minutes past the hour. This is the Weekly Allowance. Good work, Ben.
Thanks.
All right.
I don't think there's any questions coming in.
Not a lot of questions coming in. We'll see if we can spur. So I guess I would. I don't know if we want to save this for our next segment, but I would ask Ben what questions he had going into the wedding, or things that he wasn't sure about, or
right.
I don't know, things like that. We can save that for the last segment if we don't have any questions come in.
Yeah.
Through our Facebook Live. Let's get on that.
Do you want to tag out some questions? No.
Should I just comment on it?
We're going to start out to ask our own questions on this Facebook Live.
I'm going to ask a question here.
Get things sparked. Get to the top of the timeline, and then people tune in. What's the temperature in Phoenix, Ben?
I got there we go, 75.
75. It's like 61, I think, and it's pretty nice here in Nebraska. 55.
Sunny.
Yep.
Mostly cloudy.
Yep.
75.
It's nice.
All right. We had a comment just come in. question from a viewer. We'll have to touch on that when we come back.
We really don't have any music to work with, so it's not like we're waiting on anything. I almost hesitate not even taking a break in between there. Cause
that's what I thought too.
We've had so many technical difficulties, but...
You just want to jump back into it?
Let's do it.
Okay. We're going to jump back into it here, Ben.
And we're back here on the weekly allowance here on 91.1 KLPR. We're also streaming live on Facebook. Make sure if you are watching on Facebook to comment your questions to us. We'd love to answer those for you in the last few minutes of the show. Thanks for all those that are listening and all those that are watching as well. So to wrap up the show, we want to just talk about how you can have a great wedding and not break your budget, and some of the things that we can do in that realm to do those things. And I think the one thing that I want to hit on, and a big thing that we've kind of already discussed, is that there's no correlation to the size and cost of the wedding and the success of your marriage. It's fine to have a wedding that might be $8,000 or $10,000 by the time it's said and done. With that being said, it's also fine to have a wedding that may be $100,000. So I would say it's all in proportion to your income. After watching a Dave Ramsey video a little bit earlier today, he talked about how the average wedding cost, this was back kind of a year or two ago, he said the cost back then was about $27,000, and then he talks how the average household income in America is about $52,000. So people were spending about half their annual income, household income, on their weddings. So I would say that might not be what I encourage, but if you are making $10 million a year, if you want to go out and have a $200,000 wedding, then that's okay with me. So.
Yeah, planning your wedding and your honeymoon obviously are going to be stressful and expensive. And of course, it's wonderful to find someone who you can spend the rest of your life with and start to work on these things with them. However, the need to have the perfect event and the perfect day, I think, can quickly take its toll. And so it's important that your wedding and your honeymoon are both, I think, memorable and affordable. I think, as Ben mentioned, you don't want to start off your marriage by going deeply into debt. It's something that you probably don't want to do. And so we highly recommend you pay cash for your wedding and pay cash for your honeymoon. And obviously you can still have a very nice wedding when you pay cash. But you kind of do need to take into account, okay, the shorter the engagement period, then you might need to scale back the size of your wedding a little bit because you don't have enough time to save up. And it does require some special planning and some discipline, but it's going to be worth it in the end when you're able to pay cash and you're able to start your marriage off on a good foot with no debt.
Right, and I think one of the biggest questions you can ask at first is, what's the parent funding situation going to be like? I know Ben said that he was in a good situation where our parents helped out as well as Jess's parents helped out. But there may be a situation where maybe your parents aren't able to help out or maybe they don't feel inclined to. So I would say that's the first question to really ask when you're starting to plan your wedding. And then once you get that answer, maybe if the answer is no, during that engagement period, I would start putting aside as much of your income as you can for that wedding. So maybe even saving 15-20% a month of your income and try and put that away for your wedding if you want to have that nice wedding. And then limit your spending on the small stuff to save that income of maybe like a Netflix account or getting coffee every morning, or maybe it's TV or cable or the shopping sprees that someone might go on. Saving up on those small things can add up to quite a bit over a year's length of time that you can put towards some of those wedding costs as well.
Yeah, I would definitely look for areas that you can save on your wedding. Ben mentioned that they looked for a few areas that that weren't very important to them to kind of cut out, and so take your time when you're planning your wedding. Maybe you don't need a wedding planner. Maybe you don't need a special painter to come in and paint your first dance. But by all means, if you do have the finances to do it, make it as special as possible. It is a once-in-a-lifetime event where you want to make it as special as possible. And so we are by no means saying that you don't need to spend any money on your wedding, but we are saying that you should take a pragmatic approach and really start planning your wedding so that you're able to pay cash and have that special day be affordable as well.
Right, and one of the biggest tips I found online was it said, don't forget about the little things. I think we all know about the wedding dresses and the tuxedos and the DJ and the catering and all those things that go into it. But then there's things like stamps and, simple table decorations maybe, as well as like marriage license fees. All these different things can kind of go into it. And I wanted to ask Ben if he could speak on some of the little things that maybe he saw add up throughout the wedding planning process at all.
Yeah, I guess a couple of them. You mentioned the invites, and then maybe like reception decorations or table decorations, stuff like that. Those things can get out of control fast if you let them. But like the invites, wedding websites like The Knot and Minted. I know they sell invites, and they try to get this whole theme of your wedding website can look like this, and your invites and your save the dates and everything, they can all match one theme. And to do that, they're gonna get you to spend a little bit more money because everything's gonna look the same, and it's gonna be really nice. Don't get me wrong. But there's hundreds of websites that sell invitations and different types of cards and things like that you can maybe save. If you're ordering 300 invites, you could save maybe $100 or more just by going to a site that's cheaper. And if you use that same site, they're going to have the same themes. It just might not match your wedding website. But to me, it's an invite after the day of the wedding. It's probably in most people's trash, unless it's going in a scrapbook for someone. And same with the table decorations. When I go to someone else's wedding, I don't say, the first thing I'm looking at isn't the table decorations. I do like seeing some nice things at the reception, but something simple yet maybe nice, can go a long way as your guests are just sitting at the table eating dinner and talking. You can do a lot of things that look nice for a good value.
Yeah, and I even saw something with those little things that add up. One of the things said that if you put multiple colors on your wedding invitations rather than maybe just one or two, that can bump up the price to maybe 50 cents per invite, and then that adds up depending on how many invites you're sending out. But yeah, all good things there. And I would say one of my last things that I saw was cutting the guest list. I would guess is a pretty obvious one. I think there's kind of a difference that I've kind of seen between who you invite to maybe your high school graduation and who you invite to your wedding, because obviously the crowds change a little bit. I know with high school graduation, the expense isn't as big as a wedding, obviously. But I would say cutting maybe a few people, maybe even cutting 10 people from your wedding list can sometimes save you $500 to maybe even $1,000, depending on how expensive your wedding is. So I think that's a big one that people can kind of work with if they're looking to cut major costs.
I really like how you mentioned the little things add up to, and so kind of looking at ways we can cut out those smaller things that maybe don't have such an impact on the wedding too. So getting towards the end of the segment, we did have a few questions come in. So Kat asks, what are your thoughts about having debt or student loans going into a marriage? Do those loans become our loans? Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful question, and thanks for tuning in, Kat. I think the biggest thing is about getting married is it does become yours. It's ours. Nothing is yours. Nothing is mine anymore. Everything is ours. And that's kind of what we talked about last week of it's kind of like having separate bank accounts. You don't have your money. You don't have I don't have my money. It's going to become our money. And I think that's a big topic, though, of someone may have a lot of debt and then the other one may be debt-free, and then you get married and they feel so bad for putting this burden on you. But getting married is working together, and if it is paying back those loans, that's what it's going to take. That's what needs to happen, and I don't think it's right for the person that's debt-free to look down on that debt and say, hey, that's all your responsibility. I'm not going to worry about that because you're the one that did that, made those choices, not me. I think that's completely ludicrous that someone would do that, and I think it's just the fact that you are one now and all that debt is now yours.
Yeah, and I would touch on having debt going into the marriage. For me, it's not as much how much debt, but it's more so as to the attitude of their mindset of how they're going to tackle that debt.
Yep.
If obviously if you've talked about it and they're not willing to work together to maybe pay off that debt and start working towards a debt-free life, then that's an obstacle. And on the other side, though, if you have someone who's maybe $300,000 in debt, but they are fully committed and they are willing to learn and to change their ways of doing things to pay off that debt, that's a different mindset, and that's going to be a lot easier to work with that significant other to pay that debt off.
Yeah, that's a great point. I really enjoy that answer as well. Ben, any thoughts about getting married with someone, maybe one of the significant others having debt?
No, I mean, I think you guys, touched on it perfectly there. You are becoming one. Hopefully that is a discussion, like you said last week in your relationship episode, and now in this marriage episode. Hopefully you've discussed those finances. And fortunately, we weren't in that situation, getting a lot of scholarships for undergrad, but I knew getting married that Jess is going to accrue debt, most likely getting her doctorate degree. And, I knew that. And so it's something that we discussed, and, that needs to be discussed. And now it's our debt when it comes.
Completely agree. Any other questions coming in over there, Partridge, or is that about it?
That's about all I see.
The comment section of the show really wasn't blowing up like it was last week, so I don't know, maybe different topic. Maybe people aren't interested in weddings as much as relationships, but kind of like myself and Partridge talked about, we're really not near that wedding stage. But maybe this is something you guys can look back on in a few years when you're on that wedding stage or wedding planning, and you can kind of take some of these things as well. But I don't know if I really have anything else left to say. Any final thoughts from you, Austin?
No, I thought it was a great show. Yeah, hopefully our viewers are saving this podcast or this YouTube live and watching it later on in their lives when that time does come around. I understand that we're in college right now, but I think that's the time in our lives where we're starting to kind of think about these things, marriage and whatnot. So I think it was an important show to talk about today, just to get people kind of thinking about this thing, because I think it is such an important topic in today's society, like we've mentioned with the article, and about single-parent households in America and divorce on the rise and everything like that. So I think it was just a really important topic that we had for our discussion today.
Agreed. Any final thoughts from our guest, Ben?
No, thanks for having me. I enjoyed joining the discussion, and hopefully I was able to provide at least some decent input. I see Nick hasn't thrown my wedding invite away, so that's nice to know. It hold a special place in his heart, so that's pretty cool.
Right, totally agree. Well, we thank you for joining us. Always good to talk to you, Ben, and that really does it for this episode of the show. We'll be out of the studio for Thanksgiving break next week, but we encourage you to tune in on Friday, December 1st at 3 o'clock. That'll be our final episode of the semester. But in the meantime, whether you're young or old, don't put your future on hold.